friends, you have come here with a burden of invisible chains around your heart. Chains forged, not by iron, but by tenderness, by a secret vow you made somewhere in the silence of your childhood. You vowed to protect, to heal, to carry what others could not bear. And you did not even know you were making this vow, for it was written deep within the unconscious in those first nights when you heard someone you loved cry, or when you felt the storm of anger that had no place to go, and you became the vessel that absorbed it. This vow was not spoken in words, but in the silent language of the soul, a language older than your waking consciousness. And now you live with its consequence. You suffer because you still believe you must protect everyone, as though the world had placed the responsibility of its salvation upon your fragile shoulders. The empath is not a sentimental invention, nor a New Age abstraction. It is an archetype that lives within the deep strata of the psyche, a timeless figure that emerges whenever sensitivity becomes the organ of survival. Imagine a child growing in a home where unpredictability reigns. That child cannot fight, cannot flee. The only option is to feel, to sense the smallest vibrations in the room, the shift in a parent's voice, the shadow of disappointment falling across a face. In that moment, sensitivity becomes armor, empathy becomes shield, and the soul begins to protect by anticipating, by absorbing, by softening the blows that never should have landed on a child at all. And so the archetype of the protector is born not in glory, not in triumph, but in necessity. You became the silent guardian, not because you chose it, but because life chose it for you. But hear me, every archetype is both light and shadow, salvation and curse. When empathy flows as a river, it nourishes all it touches. But when the river is dammed, forced to carry what is not its own, it floods the soul and drowns its host. You who are listening know this well. You wake heavy, not knowing whose sorrow you carry. You find yourself exhausted after speaking to someone, as though they have stolen not just your time, but your very essence. You give and give until there is nothing left. And then you collapse into secret resentment, ashamed that you could feel anger at those you love. This is not your weakness. This is the curse of carrying the archetype beyond its natural boundary, of living as though you were Atlas, condemned to hold the sky. And so I say to you, you cannot protect everyone. And it is precisely because you try that you suffer. The unconscious has a cruel way of teaching us through paradox. The more you try to save others from their own pain, the more you entangle yourself in suffering that does not belong to you. You believe you are preventing their fall, but in truth you are preventing their transformation, for pain is a crucible, and without the fire, no soul can be forged. When you shield another from their necessary pain, you steal from them the alchemy of growth, and worse, you abandon your own path, your own individuation, in order to wander in the labyrinths of their unfinished story. I have sat across from many such souls in the quiet of my study, and I have seen their dreams speak the truth they could not utter aloud. One patient dreamt of standing in a burning house, carrying child after child out into the night, only to realize the house was infinite, filled with endless rooms, each with another crying child. She woke weeping, not because she could not save them, but because she finally realized she never could. The dream revealed what her conscious mind resisted. The savior role was infinite, and in playing it, she was consumed by flames. This is the fate of the empath who cannot release the illusion of protection, an endless house of need. A fire that never goes out. Do you see the pattern? The unconscious speaks in symbols because it knows that only symbols can pierce the defenses of the rational mind. You may tell yourself that you are strong enough to carry others, that love demands sacrifice, that compassion is limitless. But the dream reveals otherwise. The dream shows you drowning in an ocean of borrowed tears, climbing a mountain that has no summit, feeding mouths that never close. These are not punishments but revelations. The psyche telling you that your life force is being poured into an endless abyss, and unless you turn inward, you will be devoured. The archetype of the protector is sacred, but like all archetypes, it must serve the self, not the ego. When it is seized by the ego, it becomes inflation. You begin to imagine yourself indispensable, the one who must guard, must heal, must prevent collapse. This is the secret arrogance hidden beneath the surface of suffering. You are not arrogant in the conscious sense. You would never proclaim yourself superior, but in the unconscious there is a swelling, a belief that the world will fall apart without your vigilance, and so you tighten your grip, you extend your arms wider, and you wonder why your chest aches with the weight of invisible burdens. To let go feels like betrayal. To say no feels like cruelty. Yet it is only in surrender that you can finally breathe. Do not mistake me. Compassion is not to be abandoned. The heart must not harden into stone, but true compassion knows its limits. True compassion does not interfere with the destiny of another soul. To protect someone from their own initiation is not kindness, it is interference with the work of the gods. Think of the myth of Persephone. If her mother, Demeter, had been able to shield her from the underworld, Persephone would never have become queen of that realm, never would have discovered her power in the shadows. So it is with those around you. They must descend, they must confront their own Hades. And if you stand in the doorway trying to block the path, you are not saving them, you are robbing them of their throne. And what of you? What archetype waits within your own depths while you are busy protecting others? Perhaps the wounded child, waiting to be held at last by the adult you have become. Perhaps the shadow, filled with rage at being denied its voice. Perhaps the anima or animus, yearning to draw you into the mystery of wholeness. They wait, silent, patient, but every time you run to save another, you abandon them once more. This is why you are weary, why you are restless, even in the quiet. Your soul knows you have betrayed it for the illusion of guardianship. Do you feel the paradox yet? You became a protector because you were unprotected. You became an empath because your own cries went unheard. And now, in adulthood, you repeat the pattern, trying to give to others what you never received. But the unconscious is relentless in its demand for wholeness. It will not allow you to endlessly externalize what must be internalized. The shadow of the protector is martyrdom. And martyrdom is only holy when chosen by the self, not when compulsively enacted by the wounded ego. If you do not awaken to this truth, your body will begin to cry out where your soul cannot. Illness, fatigue, anxiety, these are the ways the unconscious demands your attention. It is not punishing you. It is summoning you home. Now listen carefully. To step away from the savior role is not to abandon love. It is to allow love to mature. It is to recognize that each soul has its own journey, and that suffering, though cruel, is often the forge of transformation. Your task is not to prevent suffering, but to walk beside those who suffer without drowning in their waters, to carry your own lantern, to hold it steady, so that others may see by its light, not to climb into their darkness and extinguish your flame in the attempt to rescue them. This is what I mean when I say you cannot protect everyone. You can only protect the sacred flame within you. And in doing so, you illuminate the path for those who are ready to see. This, my friends, is the beginning of individuation, the recognition that your energy is not infinite, that your essence is not a public resource, that the soul itself has boundaries ordained by the self. To live without such boundaries is to live in inflation, to sacrifice your wholeness for fragments of other stories. And yet, I do not say this to condemn you. I say it to awaken you. For I have seen empaths rise from martyrdom into power when they finally recognize the sacredness of their own life force, when they draw their energy back from the endless house of burning rooms, when they turn inward and face their own wounded child, when they allow the archetype of the healer to serve them first, then their compassion becomes a river once more, flowing clean, clear, and life-giving. So I ask you now, what house are you still trying to save from burning? Whose pain are you carrying as if it were your own? Whose destiny are you attempting to rewrite with the ink of your own blood? The unconscious has already shown you the answer in your dreams, in your fatigue, in the restless sighs of your spirit. It is time to listen. It is time to release, for you cannot protect everyone. And you were never meant to. The moment you begin to recognize that your suffering does not arise from the cruelty of the world, but from the secret contract you made with your own unconscious, you stand at the threshold of awakening, for you did not choose this burden out of freedom. You were compelled into it by the necessity of survival, by the hidden architecture of your childhood. And yet, the same unconscious that bound you to this path now invites you to release it, to transform the very pattern that once ensured your protection. The path of individuation is not about rejecting who you are, but about integrating the fragmented roles you have played into the wholeness of your being. And wholeness is only possible when the protector archetype is placed back in its rightful position, serving the self rather than enslaving the ego. Let us descend deeper, for the language of symbols reveals what logic cannot. Imagine the dream of the empath, a vast forest where you wander, gathering wounded animals into your arms. The more you collect, the heavier your body becomes, until at last you collapse beneath their weight. And yet, in the dream, you hear a voice whispering, "Release them. They will find their own way," but you resist, for fear they will die without you. This is the inner myth you live unconsciously, the fear that without your constant vigilance, life itself will collapse. And so you cradle the broken, forgetting that your arms too are breaking. What you call compassion may in truth be fear. Fear that if you let go, you will face the emptiness of your own wounds. Every empath carries within them a shadow. That shadow is not cruelty, but rage. Rage at having been left unprotected, rage at carrying burdens too heavy for a child, rage at the silence that swallowed their own cries. You repress this rage because you believe it contradicts your identity as a healer. But what is denied in consciousness will live in the unconscious, and what lives in the unconscious will leak into life. It appears in the secret resentment you feel toward those who take without giving. It appears in your exhaustion, in your hidden fantasies of disappearing so no one can find you. It appears in the quiet hope that someone finally will rescue you from the role of rescuer. This shadow is not your enemy. It is the key to your liberation. To integrate it is to admit that you too are human, that you too are wounded, that you too deserve protection. I recall a patient who dreamt she was a guardian angel, standing at the edge of a battlefield, trying to shield soldiers from arrows with her wings. She awoke with a sense of holiness, convinced it was her calling to sacrifice herself. But as we spoke, another truth emerged. Her wings in the dream grew bloodied and broken, and she felt fury. At the endless slaughter, she could not stop. The dream was not a command, but a revelation. She was inflating the archetype of the Savior, and her body was breaking under its weight. Only when she confronted her hidden rage did she begin to step out of the compulsion to save. Only then could she live as a woman, not as an angel bound to the impossible. This is the paradox of archetypes. They elevate and they enslave. The archetype of the healer, the protector, can illuminate the world with compassion, but when seized by the ego, it becomes possession. You are no longer yourself, you are the mask of the Savior, the persona of the rescuer, and while the world may praise you for it, your soul suffocates beneath the performance. Individuation demands you step behind the mask and ask, who am I when I am not protecting, not rescuing, not carrying? The silence that follows this question terrifies many, for it reveals the raw wound beneath the inner child still waiting to be seen, still longing to be held. But it is only by facing this wound that you can finally lay down the burden that was never yours to carry. The unconscious will not allow you to evade this forever. If you resist the call, it will send dreams that haunt you, illnesses that weaken you, relationships that drain you until you have no choice but to confront the truth. I have seen empaths whose bodies manifested chronic pain, not because of disease, but because their muscles clenched against the endless tide of unprocessed sorrow they absorbed from others. I have seen their nights filled with nightmares of drowning, of suffocation, of carrying corpses on their backs. These are not punishments. They are summons. They are the psyche demanding, look within. The suffering that drives you to exhaustion is not a curse. It is a teacher pointing you back to yourself. But you resist, for to release feels like betrayal. How can you stop protecting those you love? How can you allow them to suffer when you know you could ease their burden? And so you tighten your grip. Yet every myth, every symbol, every dream reveals the same truth. The descent into suffering is necessary. Without it, there is no transformation. To prevent another's descent is to deny them their own rebirth. Think of Christ, who did not stop Peter from weeping bitterly after the denial, who did not shield Judas from his own despair, who did not remove the cross from his own back. The archetype of the Savior itself reveals the paradox. Protection is not always rescue, and love is not always shelter. Sometimes love is to witness another in their agony without interference, to trust that the self within them is guiding them toward wholeness through the fire. And so I tell you again, you cannot protect everyone, not because you lack strength, but because protection is not always what the soul requires. Your task is to discern the difference between compassion and compulsion, between true service and the unconscious repetition of your childhood vow. To stand beside someone in their pain without collapsing into it, that is maturity. To love without saving, that is freedom. To recognize that you are not the axis on which the world turns, that is humility. Now imagine yourself standing in a circle of fire. Around you are the faces of those you love, crying for help, reaching for you. Your instinct is to run into the flames, to pull them out one by one. But in this vision, I ask you to hold still. Hold the lantern above your head and let its light pierce the darkness. Some will see it and find their way. Others will remain lost. This is not your failure. The flame you carry was not given to you to extinguish in the attempt to save the unwilling. It was given to you to light your own path, and in doing so, to guide those who are ready. The rest is mystery, and you must let the mystery be. When you release the compulsion to protect everyone, you begin to feel the contours of your own soul again. The exhaustion lifts, the resentment softens, and in its place arises a deeper compassion, one that does not interfere, one that honors the autonomy of others, one that knows the difference between empathy and enmeshment. You begin to discover boundaries, not as walls, but as rivers that flow within their natural banks. And in this state, your presence becomes more powerful than your effort. You are no longer drained by others because you no longer pour yourself endlessly into their emptiness. Instead, your being radiates, and those who are ready will draw from that radiance without consuming it. This is the mystery of individuation. The more you turn inward, the more you become a beacon outward, not by saving, not by protecting, but by embodying wholeness. And in embodying wholeness, you give others permission to pursue their own. The archetype of the protector transforms from martyrdom into witness, from compulsion into choice, from suffering into sacred presence. This is the path before you. If you dare to release the illusion that you can shield the world from its necessary pain, do not be afraid of the silence that follows when you step back. At first it will feel empty, as though you have abandoned your purpose. But wait, and you will hear the deeper voice that has been drowned out by the cries of others. It is the voice of your own self, calling you toward the life that has been waiting all along. The world does not need another savior. It needs you whole and alive, carrying the lantern of your being without extinguishing it in the storms of others. That is your true gift. That is the end of suffering. The truth you resist most fiercely is often the one that liberates you most profoundly. And for the empath, the truth is this: the world's suffering is not yours to erase. It is yours to witness, to understand, perhaps to illuminate, but never to annihilate. The fantasy of annihilating suffering belongs to the ego intoxicated by the savior archetype, not to the self that moves silently beneath. The self knows that suffering is woven into the fabric of existence, that the darkness is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a mystery to be integrated. When you attempt to eradicate it for another, you do not heal them. You rob them of their confrontation with the mystery that alone can birth their transformation. You cannot protect everyone because the path of individuation is solitary. Even those bound to you by blood and love must walk alone into their own underworld. You may accompany them to the threshold. You may sit by the door as they descend, but you cannot enter their Hades for them. To do so is to abandon your own journey and to become lost in the labyrinths of another's unconscious. And when two unconscious labyrinths entangle, neither soul emerges whole. Instead, both are trapped in a hall of mirrors, endlessly reflecting each other's wounds without ever finding the way out. Consider the dream in which a woman told me she wandered through a cemetery, trying to raise the dead with her tears. She would kneel by each grave, pouring her sorrow onto the earth, willing the soil to break open, demanding that life return. Yet the more she wept, the deeper the graves became, until they swallowed not only the dead but herself. This dream was no fantasy, it was a mirror of her waking life. She spent her days trying to revive those around her who had chosen stagnation, who had refused their own rebirth. In attempting to bring them to life, she buried herself, and so the psyche sent a dream, a warning cloaked in symbol, a cry from the unconscious that she must let the dead bury the dead. This is how the unconscious speaks to us. My friends, it is merciful in its cruelty, for it shows us the futility of our compulsions in images that cannot be denied. If you dream of drowning while saving another, if you dream of carrying bodies that never lighten, if you dream of houses crumbling despite your desperate repairs, these are not random images. They are revelations. They are the soul demanding that you recognize the limits of your power. They are saying, you are not God, you are human. And it is precisely your humanity, not your divinity, that allows true compassion to bloom. Do not mistake what I am saying for coldness. To release the role of protector is not to abandon love, it is to purify it. Love that seeks to protect everyone at all costs becomes tyranny. It strips the other of their freedom to fail, to suffer, to transform. Love that honors the sovereignty of the soul allows suffering to unfold as the forge of meaning. Do you not see? If you rescue too quickly, you deprive another of the confrontation that alone awakens their self. You may think you are helping, but in truth you are interfering with the gods themselves. The unconscious demands its rites of passage, and if you obstruct them, you invite chaos into your own house. There is an ancient archetype that lurks beneath this pattern. The wounded healer, Jung, the centaur, could heal others but never himself. He carried his wound as both curse and gift, for it gave him compassion but denied him peace. This archetype is alive in you. You tend the wounds of others, drawn by the echo of your own, but secretly you hope that by healing them you will heal yourself. Yet the unconscious is merciless in its truth. Your wound cannot be healed by proxy. You may tend the world forever, and still your wound will bleed until you turn inward and face it directly. To live as Chiron without awareness is to suffer endlessly. To live as Chiron with awareness is to accept that the wound is not meant to vanish, but to be transfigured into wisdom. But first, you must stop hiding it behind the mask of the protector. And so I ask you, when you rush to protect, whom are you really trying to save? Is it the other, or is it the child you once were? Crying in the night with no one to come? Every act of compulsive empathy is an echo of that abandoned child. You are trying to rescue yourself through others, but the projection cannot fulfill itself. The child is still waiting within. Until you turn and embrace that child, you will run endlessly to others' cries, hoping in vain that their relief will finally soothe your own. This is why you are tired, why you are disappointed, why no amount of giving ever fills you. You are searching for yourself in the wounds of others. The unconscious will not let this deception continue forever. It will strip away your illusions until you have no choice but to see. It may do this through betrayal. When those you protect turn against you, it may do this through abandonment. When those you save walk away without gratitude, it may do this through exhaustion. When your body collapses and refuses to carry another step, these are not cruelties, they are initiations. They are the gods tearing away your mask so that you may at last behold your own face. The suffering you endure is not meaningless. It is the fire in which the false savior burns away, leaving only the soul that knows its true place. But you fear this revelation, for without the mask of protector, who are you? You have built your identity on saving others, on being indispensable, on carrying what no one else could bear. To step away feels like death. And in truth, it is a kind of death, the death of the false self, the death of the savior ego. But every death in the psyche is a prelude to rebirth. The tomb is also the womb. The descent into nothingness is the gateway to wholeness. If you dare to release the compulsion to protect, you will discover a deeper identity, one not dependent on others' wounds but grounded in your own wholeness. Then, and only then, will your empathy become clean, free, radiant. Imagine a lantern again, but this time not carried in trembling hands, desperate to light the way for others. Imagine the lantern resting steadily at the center of your being, illuminating your path as you walk. Others may see its light and be guided by it, but you do not thrust it into their faces. You do not chase them into the darkness. You simply walk, and by walking, you become a beacon. This is the mature form of empathy, no longer compulsion, no longer saviorhood, but presence. You do not protect everyone, but in embodying your own light, you offer them the possibility of finding theirs, and so the suffering ends not because the world becomes less wounded, but because you no longer confuse their wounds with your own. You begin to discern the sacred boundary between souls. You honor their destiny without merging with it. You accompany without absorbing. You love without losing yourself. This is the alchemy of individuation, the transformation of compulsive empathy into conscious compassion, the transmutation of suffering into wisdom, the birth of the self from the ashes of the savior. But do not imagine this is accomplished in a single moment of insight. The unconscious demands ritual, repetition, struggle. You will fall back into the old pattern. You will feel the compulsion rise again, the desperate need to protect, to save, to sacrifice. But each time you notice it, Each time you step back instead of forward, each time you hold the lantern steady instead of extinguishing it in another storm, you strengthen the self within. This is the work of a lifetime, the slow carving of the soul into wholeness, and it is holy work, for in freeing yourself from the compulsion to protect, you free others from the illusion that they cannot walk their own path. You honor their autonomy, and in doing so, you honor the gods themselves. So I say once more, you cannot protect everyone. And it is precisely in releasing this illusion that you will discover the power of true love. Not the love that binds, not the love that rescues, but the love that witnesses, that accompanies, that illuminates, the love that trusts the unconscious, that honors the shadow, that knows suffering is not an error, but a mystery. The love that emerges when you are finally whole. You have carried the burden long enough, and the body of your soul is weary from the weight. You thought the burden was sacred, that if you laid it down, the world would collapse into chaos, that if you ceased protecting everyone, the very fabric of life would tear apart. But what if I told you that laying it down is not betrayal, but alignment with the deeper order? For the self does not ask you to save the world, it asks you to become whole, and the wholeness of one individual radiates more light than 1,000 acts of compulsive sacrifice. The unconscious is not a void, but a living cosmos filled with gods, symbols, and mysteries. Each time you intervene where you should not, you trespass upon the rights of this cosmos, you interrupt the descent, you interfere with the initiation. You must remember, every soul has its own pact with the unconscious, and that pact cannot be annulled by your pity. They must face their dragon, they must wander their desert, they must drink from the bitter cup of their own destiny. When you shield them from this, you do not love them, you bind them. You hold them in a limbo where they cannot fall, but also cannot rise. And in doing so, you entangle yourself in their shadow, mistaking it for compassion. I have seen in dreams the image of a man who tried to hold back the tide with his hands, only to be swept away. I have seen the woman who dreamt she was a tree with countless birds nesting in her branches, each pecking at her bark until she was hollow. These images are not poetic accidents, they are revelations from the unconscious, showing the fate of those who refuse to release what is not theirs to hold. And yet, when such a dream is heeded, when the dreamer awakens and dares to let the tide flow, to let the birds fly, there arises a strange peace. The hollow tree becomes rooted again, filled with sap, alive once more. The man swept by the tide realizes he is not destroyed, but carried to new shores. So it will be with you if you dare to trust the process. Do not mistake trust for passivity. To trust the unconscious is to live actively, courageously, attentively. It is to listen to the language of dreams, to the whisper of intuition, to the symbols that rise from the depths. It is to discern when love calls you to act and when love calls you to stand still. It is to honor your limits as divine boundaries, not as failures. And above all, it is to release the illusion that you are responsible for the fate of every soul you encounter. This is the deepest freedom, for in this release, you finally discover your own life waiting for you. And what is that life? It is not the endless caretaking of others. It is not the martyrdom that leaves you empty. It is the slow, luminous unfolding of your own self. When you release the compulsion to protect everyone, you free the energy that has been bound to the wounds of others. That energy becomes available for your art, your vision, your transformation. It pours into your relationships, not as exhaustion, but as presence. It reveals to you the forgotten corridors of your own soul, the archetypes waiting to be integrated, the shadow yearning to be met. In short, it restores to you your destiny. And destiny, once embraced, fills life with a depth that sacrifice can never give. Some of you fear that if you stop protecting others, they will perish. And yes, some will fall, some will stumble, some will cry out in agony. But this is not the end of the story. To stumble is not to be destroyed. It is to learn the terrain of the soul. To cry out is not to collapse. It is to awaken the inner voice that has long been silent. Even if they break, remember, gold is only formed in fire, and the self is only revealed in the breaking. You must have the humility to allow the gods to complete their work, for it is not you who holds the threads of fate. You are but one thread yourself, luminous, necessary, but not the weaver. The question then arises, what becomes of empathy? Do you harden your heart? Do you shut your eyes to suffering? No, that would be another distortion. True empathy is not abolished, it is purified. It becomes the ability to stand in the presence of another's suffering without losing yourself, to hold their gaze without absorbing their pain, to walk beside them without carrying their cross. This empathy is no longer compulsion, but presence, no longer saviorhood, but witness. And in this witnessing, you offer something far more profound than protection. You offer recognition. To be recognized in one's suffering is a gift greater than rescue. It affirms the dignity of the soul, the autonomy of its journey. Let me speak plainly. You suffer because you do not yet trust that others have a self as vast and powerful as your own. You unconsciously believe that without you they will collapse, that their soul is weaker, that their unconscious is less merciful. But this is not true. Every human being is accompanied by the self, that hidden center which orchestrates their paths with wisdom beyond comprehension. Trusting, this is the hardest task for the empath, for it requires relinquishing the illusion of control. It requires bowing before the mystery and saying, I cannot walk this for you, but I will walk beside you. I cannot shield you from your night, but I will hold the lantern until you find your own flame. And what of your suffering? It will not vanish overnight. The old vow is deeply ingrained. You will feel its pull. You will hear its whisper. You will be tempted to run back into the burning house, to cradle the endless children, to shield the arrows with your wings. But each time you remember this truth, each time you hold back, each time you release, you break another link in the chain. Slowly, the burden lifts. Slowly, you breathe again. Slowly, you return to yourself. And one day you will look back and realize that what you thought was betrayal was salvation. That what you thought was abandonment was love. That what you thought was suffering was the alchemy of becoming whole. I tell you this not as abstract philosophy, but as lived truth. I have walked with those who bore the Savior's wound, and I have seen their transformation. I have watched them descend into despair when they could no longer carry the burden, and I have watched them emerge radiant when they finally released it. The radiance was not the glow of perfection, but the quiet light of authenticity. The peace that comes when one lives no longer in compulsion, but in alignment with the self. And I tell you now, this peace is waiting for you. It is not beyond reach. It is as close as the breath you take, as near as the shadow you fear, as present as the child within you who waits to be embraced. So let us end here, not with a command, not with a doctrine, but with an image. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast sea. Behind you lies the house of burning rooms, the endless graves, the battlefield where you shielded others with broken wings. Before you lies the sea, dark and infinite, the mystery of your own self. In your hand is the lantern, flickering but alive. You feel the pull to turn back, to save once more, to repeat the vow. But instead, you step forward, you step into the sea, not to drown but to be carried. The water rises, the lantern glows, and as you surrender to the waves, you realize you are not extinguished. You are borne by the currents of the self, guided by the depths of the unconscious, carried toward a shore you have never seen, but have always longed for. This is individuation. This is freedom. This is the end of suffering. And when you emerge upon that shore, you will no longer try to protect everyone. You will simply live whole and luminous, and in your living, you will reveal to others the path they too must walk. You will no longer carry their burden, but by embodying your own wholeness, you will remind them of theirs, and that is the greatest protection you could ever offer, not shielding them from life, but showing them through your own being that life, in all its suffering and all its mystery, is survivable, transformable, meaningful. That is your task. That is your gift. That is why you are here.